Okay, so as Dr. Annual has said, I've been researching on this topic for about the last 4 years, and this is a compilation of basically all of the research, so there's a lot of material. I'm going to go through it as quickly as humanly possible. It'll be about 35 to 40 minutes. I'm still going to try to leave some time for questions. We'll see how that goes. But the title of this presentation is How Has Our Song Changed? A Corpus Analysis of the Music and Lyrics in Our Congregational Songs. And so this is what I presented, like you said, at ETS and for here this morning. Languages have been around for millennia, and over time they undergo changes in expression and vocabulary. This is certainly true, wait for it, there we go. This is certainly true of the English language in contemporary America, according to John McWhorter. In his 2003 book, Doing Our Own Thing, The Degradation of Language and Music and Why We Should Care, McWhorter discusses the swift and startling change in written and oral communication in American culture, emanating from the countercultural revolution of the 1960s, resulting in a near total loss of formal expression through language. As he explains, I have claimed that the United States has undergone a shift in its relationship to self-expression that has had an effect beyond anything traceable to education or larger currents of intellectual history. McWhorter further explains music as a language has been susceptible to the same sort of change in recent decades in America. The default classical music of the early 20th century America, with its long melodic lines and intricate harmonies, has been replaced by music popularized by rhythm and the vernacular authenticity of the singer's vocal tone. As McWhorter says, quote, certainly we haven't tossed out melody and harmony altogether, but we can do without them if the beat is fine enough, unquote. Because rhythm is the driving musical factor in much music today, pieces tend toward an oral, improvisatory tradition, as opposed to written down compositions of the classical tradition. Quote, most pop today is driven less by what the composer writes down than the performer taking raw materials and fashioning it into an individually charismatic performance. New pop is spoken music. Old pop was much more written down. At the same time, narratives in contemporary culture have become increasingly narcissistic. The reality for most people is that we like talking about ourselves. And unfortunately, contemporary culture continues to provide more and more outlets for people to talk about and promote themselves, i.e. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, self-started blogs, etc. In his book, The Divine Embrace, Recovering the Passionate Spiritual Life, Robert Weber contends that the church has embraced this culturally driven narrative, resulting in me-oriented worship that sees God as the object of man's worship rather than the subject. As he states, me-oriented worship is the result of a culturally driven worship. When worship is situated in the culture and not in the story of God, worship becomes focused on the self. It becomes narcissistic. The real underlying crisis in worship goes back to the fundamental issue of the relationship between God and the world. If God is the object of worship, then worship must proceed from me, the subject, to God, who is the object. God is the being out there who needs to be loved, worshiped, and adored by men. Therefore, the true worship of God is located in me, the subject. Weber continues, biblical worship tells and enacts God's story. Narcissistic worship, instead, names God as an object to whom we offer praise, honor, and homage. Narcissistic worship is situated in the worshiper, not in the action of God that the worshiper remembers through word and table. So how has this dramatic change in both music and narrative in contemporary secular American culture affected music in American evangelical churches? Do we find the same trends of secular culture happening with congregational music in recent years? If so, do these trends foster congregational participation in singing, or do they hinder the act of communal worship through song? In order to answer these questions, it is necessary to analyze congregational songs of the church to determine if and what has changed over the years. Several notable studies have focused on contemporary congregational songs, as well as traditional evangelical hymns. However, to date, there is not a published study focusing on precise changes in the music over time from traditional hymnody to contemporary congregational songs, nor has there been a comparison of lyrics in these same songs with regard to the balance of focus between God and man, although Lester Ruth has compared evangelical hymns to contemporary congregational songs in order to assess Trinitarian content, and that was actually published in Artistic Theologian in 2015. So, my research, which represents a corpus analysis of 474 songs currently sung in American evangelical churches, helps to pinpoint musical and lyrical changes that have occurred in congregational songs over time in order to assess how these changes have impacted communal singing in the church. The corpus was compiled using ranked lists from multiple music companies. Actually, I think that's what it should be. The main corpus, made up of 374 songs, is a combination of CCLI's top 25 song lists from 1989 to 2020, CCLI's top 100 most popular public domain songs, Praise Chart's top 100 worship songs of all time, Hal Leonard's the best praise and worship songs ever, and Hal Leonard's more of the best praise and worship songs ever. 2 additional corpuses were created from CCLI's top 50 Geddes songs and CCLI's top 50 Sovereign Grace songs, since both groups are scarcely represented in the other ranked lists, but are sung in many evangelical churches in America. For the lyrical study, then, the 150 Old Testament psalms were also added to the corpus. So the musical analysis focuses on aspects of harmony, including the number of chords and chord inversions used, harmonic progressions used, and the final cadence for each song. Rhythm, including the number of melodic beat displacements for each song, and melody, including the original printed key from song select, and the vocal range of the melodic line for each song, as well as the tessitura for select songs. The lyrical analysis includes a tabulation of the number of references to man through personal pronouns implying man, as well as the number of references to God, both through pronouns implying God and direct names for God. The tabulation of God and man references was compared in each song in order to determine the balance of focus. Now, the songs in the main corpus are compiled into 5 time periods, which reflect musical changes over time. And you can see those there, those songs written prior to 1970, then the 70s and 80s, third group is the 90s, then 2000s, and the 2010s. In order, or teens, I guess you would say. Also, in order to establish a consistent standard for analysis, all songs in the corpus are analyzed based on the musical score presented in CCLI Song Select. While one could argue that musical performances vary between churches for a single song, CCLI's Song Select music provides the most complete and standardized representation of the music in the corpus by which to analyze. Now, the first musical consideration in the corpus study was harmony. The analysis included a tabulation of the number of unique chords used in a song, as well as the number of chordal inversions. So I did not tabulate the number of times each chord was used in the song, but its presence in the song accounted for it being there. So there are several interesting results from the harmonic chord analysis. First, the use of unique chords in a song, as well as the number of chordal inversions used in a song, significantly decrease overall in songs written after 1990. As you can see here, as the following slides show, prior to 1990, songs have a concentrated number of songs using at least 2 chordal inversions and between 3 to 8 chords. So here's the 70s and 80s. As we move to the 1990s, however, there's a shift toward more root positions only, and the number of chords in each song are concentrated to around 4 to 5 chords. In fact, in the songs written after 2010, in this slide, over 90% use 2 chordal inversions or less, with more than 30% of the songs using only root position chords. This overwhelming use of root position chords in contemporary worship songs in recent decades follows similar trends seen in rock music, based on findings from the corpus analysis of rock harmony in Trevor DeClercq and Temperley's 2011 article. Second, the majority of songs written prior to 1990 use at least one secondary dominant chord. The use of secondary dominant chords show a more complex harmonic structure than simply using diatonic chords, or those that are in the established key. The use of secondary dominance decreases in songs in the 1990s and dramatically decreases after 2000, with only 3% of songs after the 2010 using a secondary dominant chord. Third, the use of the 6/7 chord, and to a lesser extent the 4/7 chord, not shown in this chart, increases significantly in songs written after 1970. Prior to 1970, songs utilized the 6 and the 4 chord almost exclusively as a triad, following common practice tonality. The increased use of the 6/7 and the 4/7, along with 2 and 3/7 chords in songs after 1970, is perhaps an influence of jazz harmony in recent decades. Finally, the use of the 5/7 chord abruptly drops in songs written after 1990. The loss of the chordal 7th tendency tone weakens the cadential motion toward the tonic chord or the tonic substitute, the minor 6 chord. By removing the chordal seventh of the dominant, the resolution to the subdominant chord becomes a viable option based on the single tendency tone 7-1 in the dominant triad. This progression 5-4, while a rarity in common practice tonality and hymnody, is used frequently in recent songs, both sacred and secular. And in fact, the de Klerk Temperley 2011 article discusses the prevalence of the 5-4-1 progression in rock harmony. Now, in addition to analyzing individual chords, specific harmonic progressions were also analyzed. The most prominent change that has occurred between songs prior to 1970 and songs particularly after 2000 is the decrease of the traditional dominant to tonic progression and the increase of the subdominant to tonic progression, as you can see the two highlighted columns there. In fact, the use of the 6-4-1 progression is particularly intriguing, as it occurs in less than 4% of songs prior to 1970, but is in a majority of songs after 2010. Also, the use of the 5-4 retrogression, which occurs in only one song prior to 1970, is used in a majority of songs after 2000, which I think is one of the most striking features to see there and the standout of changes in harmony. Also, the final harmonic cadence was analyzed in order to assess song endings. As the chart shows, the use of the 5-1 ending, whether a 5 or a 5-7 chord, decreases steadily after 1970, with a more dramatic decrease in songs after 2000. In contrast, the use of the 4-1 or plagal motion increases steadily in songs after 1990. Most notably, however, is the use of a final cadence that ends away from tonic. This motion is not seen in a single song prior to 1990. Which follows traditional tonality's overwhelming use of tonic endings. However, after 2000, more than a third of the songs in the corpus end away from tonic. While a majority end on a 4 chord, there are many that end with a 5 or a 5 sus, or even a 2 or a minor 6 chord. While there's not time to unpack ramifications to these findings, the previous analysis demonstrates the changes that have occurred to the harmonic language in congregational songs in recent decades, mirroring the harmonic changes that have occurred in American secular music. Now, the second consideration in the corpus study was rhythm, particularly melodic rhythm. While harmonic changes do not necessarily have a negative impact on congregational participation, the melodic rhythm of a song has a major impact on a group's ability to sing together. The purpose of this analysis was to determine the complexity of a melody's rhythm based on the use of beat displacements. Now, displacing a beat can occur in two ways, as shown in the following musical examples. Front beat displacement, in which the melodic note comes in earlier than anticipated, or backbeat displacement, in which the melodic note comes in later than anticipated. These displacements usually occur with either an 8th note or a 16th note. The more beat displacements in a melodic line, along with more categories of beat displacements used, the more complex and unpredictable the melodic rhythm, creating increased difficulty for communal singing, especially without printed sheet music to read from. So the following chart presents some of the findings from the melodic rhythm analysis based on a tabulation of the number of beat displacements in a melody line, as well as the number of categories of beat displacements used. Now, there's several major shifts in complexity of melodic rhythm, especially in the last 30 years, as indicated in these findings. First, the percentage of songs that utilize beat displacements has grown significantly since 1990. This can be seen in the first 3 columns. As the numbers show, prior to 1970, less than 7% of the songs have an instance of any sort of beat displacement in the melodic rhythm, and not a single song utilizes both types. Since 1990, however, almost 9 out of 10 songs utilize 8th note displacements, and over half utilize both types of displacements. And that's a very big change in the melodic rhythm. Second, there's a dramatic increase not only in the songs that use beat displacements, but also the number of instances of beat displacements used in a song. The fourth category, or the fourth column, shows the percentage of songs that use more than 10 beat displacements throughout the melody. Not a single song in the corpus prior to 1970 utilizes more than 10. In contrast, starting in the 1990s, at least 8 out of 10 songs have utilized more than 10 within a melody. In fact, in the 2000s, all but 3 of the songs in the corpus use at least 10 displacements. So that's really interesting. As the graph shows, the number of beat displacements increased dramatically in songs after 1990. No, sorry, I missed this. The Getty songs follow similar statistics to traditional hymnody, while Sovereign Grace songs align more closely with contemporary congregational songs. So this is kind of interesting. I'm using them as separate corpuses, but just seeing the difference even between those two groups of writers and artists. Now, as the following graph shows, the number of melodic beat displacements increases dramatically in songs after 1990. The purple line is the moving average of total number of beat displacements. So that's the one on the very top. The blue line is 8th note and the red line is 16th note displacements. So I'm taking a melodic or an average of 25 songs and it's constant moving average. So these are all based on chronological ideas. So when you get to 1990, notice the large uptick there. So interestingly, the average use of 8th note displacements and total displacements decreases around 2010, while the average use of 16th note displacements increases steadily. That's the red line. So that's kind of interesting, just some of the observations there. However, in general, songs after 2000 use an average of at least 25 beat displacements per song, whereas songs prior to 1990 use an average of less than 5. Showing a striking change toward rhythmic complexity in the majority of melody lines in recent congregational songs. The third consideration in the corpus was melody, specifically the melodic range in the original printed key and the tessitura in several songs, or in select songs, sorry. The melodic range includes the highest and lowest notes sung in the melody, which was then entered into a graph with the songs in chronological order. Based on the vocal ranges given in the New Harvard Dictionary of Music voice categories, a strict voice range overlap using octave equivalents would be C4 to C5. A more flexible voice range would increase each limit by a tone to B flat 3 to D. This gives a voice range overlap of an octave plus a third. So taking into octave equivalents, that would be all voice categories could sing the B flat to a D. That's the overlap within all four, or all the categories that are given there. This graph is a zoomed in version of the melody analysis in order to demonstrate changes in the melodic range over the years. As the graph goes by here, the melodic range for the vast majority of songs up to the year 2000 stay within that voice range category, and that's in the shaded blue as the graph goes along. So these are each songs that are moving by, and you see the highest note and lowest note. Okay. After the year 2000, though, which we're going to see here in a moment, the melodic range both expands and shifts higher. Okay, so we're seeing some songs in the 1990s, but once we hit 2000, we're going to see this expanding of the melodic range as well as shifting higher, with the majority of songs reaching E to F sharp, even G5, particularly in the last 5 years. As this keeps going, you're going to see even a more increased shift. But not only that, but just each song sways back and forth within the graph. And this gets to like the last few years. So this just shows the last few years of songs and their melodic range. So depending on the song that you choose, you're either going to have a very low one or a very high one, okay? Let me just go back so you can see comparing this to that, okay? So there's a huge difference between those, okay? Now, the following graph, which might be very hard to read, and I can't remember if I zoomed in on this or not, tabulates the vocal extremes in the melodic line of these songs. Basically, prior to 1990, almost 90% of the melodies were within the voice range overlap. After 2000, though, there's a dramatic shift both upward and downward, such that over half of the songs written after 2000 have melodies that include notes higher than the voice range overlap. Now, to be fair, songs can be transposed down or up to provide a more comfortable vocal range. And indeed, that is the case with some songs. We just transpose it up or down. However, this graph shows how large the melodic range is based on half steps or semitones. So if the range of a melody is 16 half steps or lower, then that song can be transposed into a key that will allow the melody to lie within the voice range overlap. However, even transposing songs, almost 30% of them written after 2000 still have melodies that lie outside the voice range overlap, which means they're larger than 16 semitones. Okay? Based on this, it is evident that these songs were not written primarily for communal singing. Now, while we do not have time to discuss changes in key areas over time right now, the following chart shows how key areas have shifted from flat key to sharp key areas, particularly since 1990. In fact, more than 30% of the songs since 1990 are written in keys with 3 or more sharps. The shift is indicative of primarily guitar-led instrumentation. This would make sense with the open strings of the guitar. But however, this creates a nightmare if you're using those keys for an orchestra. Any clarinets in here that play a B-flat clarinet know what I'm talking about. Okay, the vocal range alone does not provide a complete picture. The melody's tessitura provides a more detailed idea of where the majority of the notes are sung. Identifying the tessitura in a melody is a matter of identifying which notes are sung the most. A visual inspection of a song's melodic line, i.e. a lead sheet, will provide a quick overview of recurring notes and can give a general idea of the song's tessitura. A more precise identification, though, involves tabulating the amount of time each individual pitch is sung, adding those values together, and then figuring out from that how long each one is being sung on. Since this process of tabulating each pitch duration can be painstakingly arduous, this process was not completed for every song in the corpus. It takes a long time. Rather, a representative corpus, as listed on this slide, was chosen to show differences between public domain songs and current contemporary congregational songs. Okay. Now, in looking at percentages for each pitch in the combined lists, the public domain songs have a clear center of pitches around G4 and A4. Those would be the dark blue lines. So we're going up and you're seeing the percentage within the top 25 public domain songs. Conversely, the songs from the current top 25 songs, particularly those written after 2010, have a more evenly distributed tessitura and especially higher percentages from pitches D5 to F5. I don't have a zoomed in picture of this, but that light blue, you can see there's much more percentages when you get D5, E flat, E, F, where you don't see the dark blue hardly at all there, which means that we're spending a lot more time singing in the higher tessitura in these contemporary songs. This tessitura shift greatly affects certain voice types from being able to sing a melodic line at pitch, forcing them to either jump the octave multiple times or try and find a harmony part. In either case, the higher tessitura combined with melodic rhythmic complexity hinders communal singing in the church. Now, on to lyrics. So in addition to studying the primary musical aspects of songs in the corpus, my analysis also includes a study of the lyrics in order to assess the balance of focus between God and man in the words that are being sung. These findings were also compared to the text from the 150 Psalms in the Old Testament. A potential issue with tabulating references to God and man in the Old Testament Psalms is the text language used for analysis. One could argue that any English translation of the original Hebrew language will provide grossly inaccurate tabulation numbers. This is true to an extent. However, while the number of pronoun references in English translations greatly exceed those in the original Hebrew, the ratio of first person to second person to third person references is actually very close between the original Hebrew language and the English translations. Having compared the ratios between the English or the ESV, the NASB, and the KJV, the ESV is closest to the three of the three to the percentages of the original Hebrew language. Therefore, the ESV was the chosen version for tabulation. So the first focus of the lyrical analysis was to look at references to God, both through pronoun usage and direct naming of God. Now, direct names would include or would indicate God as Father, Son, or Holy Spirit. However, words such as fortress, rock, etc. were excluded from the tabulation of direct names, since these refer to images for God rather than names for God. So there's several interesting results of this analysis, just looking at the direct names. First, the number of songs using the second person pronoun for God, you or your, within the main corpus of songs doubles from songs prior to 1970 to those written after 1990. The Old Testament sits somewhere in the middle to upper range of those averages. The Gettys follow similar statistics as traditional hymnody, as you can see there in the second to last column, while Sovereign Grace again follows contemporary lyrical practices. Second, songs that use the third person pronoun, he or him, indicating a more formal, distant aspect, decreased by almost half from songs prior to 1970 to songs written after 1990. Again, traditional hymnody follows closely with the Old Testament Psalms, as does songs by the Gettys. Third, the number of songs directly naming God decreases steadily in songs after 1970, up to 2010, to the point that between 1990 and 2009, more than 16% of songs within the main corpus do not directly name God even once. This means that these songs only use pronouns to refer to God or use imagery to depict God without formally addressing God. Conversely, every psalm in the Old Testament formally names God at least one time. Now, while the percentage of songs with no direct naming of God is roughly 16% after 1990, the number of times God is referenced in songs is not as oft balanced. For instance, the percentage of times, or the percentage of songs referencing God at least 5 times is around 58% in songs prior to 1970, which is roughly the same or even lower than songs written after 1990. In fact, The percentage of songs referencing God at least 10 times is at its highest in songs written after 2000. In other words, songs written in the last 20 years show a propensity for either not naming God at all or naming him in abundance. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. As mentioned before, while direct names of God were used for this tabulation, there are instances of references to God without direct names for God. However, even with that tabulation entered, there are still 18 songs that have no reference to God other than pronoun usage. We're not even using imagery. It's literally just you. As this song list shows, all but one song were written after 1990. These songs could be referred to as the Jesus is my boyfriend songs, since there is no direct reference to the person being sung to. Okay? Literally nothing direct reference. Okay. Yes. Thank you. I'll be here till Thursday. Okay. With regard to the referencing of God, it is important to look not only at the number of songs that use pronouns or direct names for God, but also at the number of times each type of pronoun or direct naming of God is used compared to the total number of references. So this shows the percentage of second-person pronoun, third-person pronoun, and direct names of God compared to the total number of God references in all the songs from each time period. Okay, so there are several notable results from this analysis as well. First, the percentage of you pronouns accounts for more than half of all the references to God in songs written after 1990, compared to only 16% in songs prior to 1970. Conversely, the number of he pronouns decreases substantially in songs after 1990, as does the percentage of direct names of God. The songs by the Gettys, again, follow closely to traditional hymnody, while Sovereign Grace follows closely to contemporary lyrical practices. It's kind of interesting how those align very differently. Now, here's a fun graph. The following graph provides a timeline of the main corpus from the previous table with trend lines showing the average. Here's another 25 song moving average. The dark blue line is the second person pronoun, the light blue is the third person, and the green line is direct naming for God. So as this figure highlights, using a 25 song moving average, the transition period occurs between 1970 and 1990 and continues much the same way after 1990. So you see that convergence of moving less from third person, more from second person within the 1970s and 80s. The second focus of the lyrical analysis is the use of personal references. There are two possible uses of personal pronoun references. One is the singular, first person, I, me, my, mine, which focuses on individual singing. The other is the plural first person, we, us, our, which focuses on the corporate body singing the song. Following table presents the percentages of songs that utilize either first person singular, first person plural, both singular and plural, or neither. It's interesting to note that 18% of the psalms do not have a first person pronoun in them. These psalms are not focused on first person man at all, but rather outwardly to others and to God solely. While around 10% of songs prior to 1990 are also solely God focused, that number drops substantially to only 3% or less of songs after 1990. Another interesting observation is that while first person singular pronouns range from 60 to 80%, first person plural range from 35 to 50% in the main corpus and in the Psalms, songs by the Gettys fall way outside these average in both cases. The Getty songs use first person singular pronouns in less than half of their songs in the corpus, while first person plural are found in 84% of those songs. These statistics are strikingly different than all other categories and highlight the songwriter's focus on corporate singing. In addition to looking at the percentage of songs using first person pronouns, the analysis included looking at the number of times pronouns were used in each song. This again involves looking at the form of the song and tabulating each type of pronoun based on how many times it would be sung in repeated passages. So this is one area where I differ in other analyses. Previous analyses of tabulation of times that things are sung, they only look at lyrics one time through. I'm taking form into account, so if we repeat the chorus 4 times, we're counting those pronouns 4 times. Again, this can get into performance practice, but based on the CCLI song select chart, that's how I'm tabulating them. So as the chart shows, the use of first person singular pronouns dramatically increases in songs after 1990, as does the use of first person plural after 2000. Traditional hymnody follows very closely to the word averages of the Psalms, which I think is kind of interesting as well. That would be the prior 1970. At the same time, the use of second person pronouns for God you, increase even more dramatically, more than 5 times the amount from songs prior to 1970 to after 2010. Here, however, the Psalms sit roughly in the middle. So the Psalms still reference God as you around 9 times per Psalm average. Finally, the use of third-person pronoun decreased over time by roughly half, and the use of God references actually increase slightly over time, which is interesting. Now here again is a graph moving average that are showing the use of first-person, second-person God, and third-person God pronouns over time. As the graph shows, the use of first-person pronouns, dark blue, actually increased between 1870 to 1970 before dropping significantly in the 70s and 80s. This dramatic change coincides with the rise of the charismatic movement in America, as well as the Jesus movement within the evangelical community. However, after 1990, the use of first-person pronouns significantly increases, reaching an average of 30 times per song by the mid-2010s. This is 3 times the number of uses of first-person pronoun than in songs prior to 1870, which I think is an interesting observation there. Now, while the use of first person increases significantly, the use of second person God also significantly increases. This would be calling God you. Conversely, the use of he pronouns for God decreases. Okay, so this significant rise of second person pronouns in songs after 1990 indicate a shift in the view of God in song lyrics. Songs tend to focus on the personal aspect of God, his immanence to man, rather than his transcendence and distance from man. The increased use of you pronouns can also have the effect of clouding the object of who one is singing to, especially if there is no direct names for God or it comes late in the song. Okay, so kind of interesting. Now, the last part of the lyrical analysis includes a look at the balance of focus between God and man in each of the songs or the psalms. And here is based on a simple formula used in Daniel Thornton's 2015 dissertation, who also looked at some contemporary songs this way. As the formula shows, any number over 1 is considered man-focused, meaning more man pronouns than God pronouns in a song, while any number under 1 is considered God-focused. So the following table shows the percentage of songs in each time period based on the balance of focus for each song. Here, there's again some interesting features, observations here. First, in the main corpus, the most God-focused time period of songs by far is 1970 to 1990. Followed by 2000 to 2009. Part of the reason that songs prior to 1970 are lower is the fact that songs after 1870 became much more man-focused. Kind of interesting, in the corpus, there was about 100-year where songs shifted to more man-focused. Second, the most man-focused time period is between 1990 to 1999 and in this last decade. Third, more than half of the Psalms reference God at least twice as many times as man. None of the other time periods are that doubly God-focused. Finally, in contrast to the main corpus, the Gettys and Sovereign Grace songs are much more God-focused, with 75% of their songs referencing God more than man. Following the previous analysis, the following graph presents the main corpus in chronological order, following trends over time. The graph highlights the fact that the balance of focus in congregational songs has actually shifted back and forth over time. So that middle line is the balance between God and man focus. So it's going back and forth between that. This actually, let's see, the period of 1870 to 1970 shows a shift from more God-focused songs to more man-focused. And in fact, 1890 to 1970, this graph presents the most man-focused song average than any other period, including today. This actually refutes the notion that songs today are more me-focused than ever before. The period from 1970 to 1990 again shows an abrupt shift, with the balance shifting back to God-focused. But then after 1990, the balance shifts back to man-focused, a trend that stayed roughly the same for the past 30 years as you go through that moving average here. So the reason that the balance of focus has not dramatically shifted to man focus, despite the increased use of man references, is that there's almost an equal increase of the number of God references in those same songs. Like I had mentioned, we either don't name God or we name him in abundance, right? So if we name him in abundance, we name ourselves in abundance, we still have a moving average that's roughly the same. Okay, so for instance, when viewing the trend over time of the number of references to God and the number of personal references, the two lines tend to decrease and increase at similar intervals. Okay. While these figures present a general trend in groups of songs over time, the corpus analysis is not arguing that singing a man-focused congregational song is somehow less praiseworthy than singing a God-focused song. There are plenty of excellent man-focused songs written over the year. Well, maybe not the Star Spangled Banner. I'm not sure we would, need to sing that. But for instance, that was in the corpus. That's part on the CCLI thing. For instance, these songs in the corpus have a fraction larger than 4, which means there are at least 4 times as many man references as they reference God. In looking at this list, 6 of those songs were written between 1869 to 1932, the period of time when the trend line shifts to more man-focused songs. However, these songs still are theologically sound and display a richness for thinking about our place before God. So the point is not to disparage the use of man-focused songs, but to understand that there needs to be a balance between focusing on man versus focusing on God. If we only sing man-focused songs, we miss out on truly focusing our attention and our position to the subject of our worship, which is the triune God. Now, in conclusion, as the corpus study demonstrates, the music of congregational songs in the American Evangelical Church has changed dramatically in recent years in regards to harmony, melody, rhythm, musical changes. Much of these musical changes have had a negative effect on communal singing. As harmony has been simplified, melodic rhythm has become increasingly more complex. Without printed sheet music, the increasing complexity to melodic rhythm challenges communal participation in singing. Furthermore, the vocal range and tessitura of many congregational songs have expanded and shifted higher, moving beyond the voice range overlap and creating increased difficulty in certain voice types to actively participate. At the same time, the lyrical focus of the congregational songs have also undergone some dramatic changes within the last few decades. With regard to referencing God, there's been an increase in the number of songs that do not directly name God, specifically after 1990. At the same time, songs after 1990 have significantly increased the use of personal pronoun you when referring to God, in that over 50% of the references to God in those songs are second-person pronouns. With regard to personal references, there has been a twofold increase in the number of those references between songs written prior to 1970 and those written after 1990, which mirrors the narcissism that abounds in the narrative of contemporary culture. However, the increased use of God references in many of these same songs balances that out. So even though we talk about ourselves a lot more, we also talk about God a lot more. Finally, in looking at the balance of focus in songs, there has been several shifts back and forth between man-focused and God-focused songs over time. Ultimately, this research offers clarity and precision to the discussion of musical and lyrical changes in congregational songs over time. It's intended to show some of the nuances of these changes in order to help worship leaders understand and take seriously the role of selecting songs for corporate singing. This role includes critically examining the music to select songs that provide maximum participation in congregational singing. This role also includes critically examining the lyrics and the balance of focus between God and man in each song being sung. We need to be ever mindful of the subject of our worship, which is God. As believers, we are not the subject of worship, and any song that puts the focus on man without properly aligning that focus to the true subject of worship, God, should not be considered for the corporate worship of God. It should be the goal of every worship leader to choose songs with lyrics that express these truths, combined with music that promotes communal participation. This research hopefully helps shed light on the kinds of things to look for in selecting these songs. Thank you.